After a year of traveling abroad and lecturing, Nehemia Gordon came to Charlotte to spend some time, and the very first evening, we got into a topic that I said, I really need you to dig into the book of Acts with me because there's something that needs to be explained as only a former Pharisee could even understand these particular things. And so I invited Nehemia Gordon back, and we're finally getting around to the first half-hour discussion that we had
right.
in that 5-hour night. And it's concerning the book of Acts.
Yeah.
And so I'll lay out the foundation here.
Yeah.
It is the believers are in Antioch. Paul and Barnabas are there. They're just returning from Lystra, where Paul was stoned. Luke is up there. He's been a part of the synagogue up there. And these believers are, they speak, and Aramaic is the language spoken in that area. And so we have a number of believers that came from Judea, and they are all up there because of the number of Gentiles who are coming to faith, and they started in the synagogue, in the Jewish synagogue, and so these Gentiles, these Greeks are coming to faith. But now we have, and I'll read this out of the chronological Gospels. This is the book of Acts, chapter 15, verse 1. Certain men came down from Judea and taught the brothers, saying, unless you're circumcised after the manner of Moses, you cannot be saved. And so after Paul and Barnabas had a great dissension, there's a big argument with them, then they decided that certain of them would go down to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders and ask them this question. And it says, then certain spokesmen of the sect of the Pharisees, which believed, these are believers who were raised as Pharisees, and they're now believers, and they stood up and said that it was necessary to circumcise the Gentiles and command them to keep the law of Moses. And so, Nehemia, this is going to take us all the way through into 15 and other parts, but from your perspective as a former Pharisee, you're raised as a Pharisee, your father's rabbi, you're going back generations of Pharisee rabbis, and so what is this saying to you? These believers who are Pharisees then making these assertions to the believers up in Antioch.
Well, so Michael, when I first read this years and years and years ago, it was obvious what they were saying, that if you want to be part of God's covenant, in other words, if you want to be part of God's covenant, first you have to be Jewish. You have to convert to Judaism in a formal way, and the way that rabbinical Judaism and honestly even Karaite Jews generally will teach the same thing, even though it's not biblical, and this is where I part ways from many Karaites. What they'll teach is that to be a Jew, you have to formally be accepted. You have to appear before a council of rabbis, for a Beit Din, and you have to get their stamp of approval to be part of the people of Israel. And you could say you're an Israelite, you could accept the God of Israel and the people of Israel and be circumcised till you're blue in the face, but unless you get that stamp of approval from this official body of rabbis, you will not be accepted in their mind as a Jew. And it's interesting, I'm just thinking as I'm talking about this, that if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, that there are some Christian denominations where you could go to a body of water and accept Jesus and be baptized, but they won't consider you a true Christian unless they baptize you.
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
You have to be rebaptized again into their denomination.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
So even if you were baptized by another denomination, you have to be baptized into their denomination, you're saying?
That's
okay.
right.
I was talking about if you baptize yourself, so to speak. And you're saying something even more than what I realized. Wow. So the point is that these Pharisees had a very similar concept. It doesn't matter what you do, what you believe. The only thing that matters is, number one, your lineage. If you were born a Jew to a Jewish family, then you're Jewish. Or if you weren't, then you must go through their authority to convert. And the problem that happened in the time of the Roman Empire, and I remember learning this decades ago at Hebrew University when I did my undergraduate degree in archaeology, is that you had a large population in the Roman Empire who are referred to in Jewish sources as God-fearers. God-fearers were people who wanted to be Jewish, but there was something keeping them back from undergoing this formal process. And one of the major things that would stop any adult male from undergoing the formal process, both then and quite frankly even today in some places, is the act of physical circumcision. You know, Michael, a few years back, I was reading this medieval Jewish text, and it was the opinion of this one Jewish author that if you're a Kohen, a descendant from Aaron, that you're not allowed to be present in the room when an 8-day-old boy is being circumcised. And you might ask, well, why? Well, why would a Kohen not be allowed to be in the room? And the answer was obvious in these sources. According to the Torah, a Kohen becomes ritually unclean if he's in the same room as a dead body. And circumcision was so dangerous that even an 8-day-old boy could die. It didn't happen all the time, but it did happen that, you know, especially back then when infant mortality was very, very high. And then, I mean, 200 years ago in the Western world and still today in some parts of the world. I mean, go to Haiti and their infant mortality we should be ashamed in the Western world of what babies die all the time just because they're young and weak. And so the point was, if a baby would die from being circumcised on the 8th day, then boy, is that dangerous for an adult. And I had a friend in Israel who wasn't Jewish, but believed in Yeshua and wanted to keep Torah, and he wanted to be circumcised. He just felt in his heart he wanted to be circumcised, and many American men are already circumcised. He wasn't American. He was from South Africa. And so he asked me, will you inquire where I can get circumcised? And I went and I asked around, and I found out, and I even contacted the Moel, the circumciser that my sisters use. My sisters, between them, I've lost count how many nephews, a whole bunch of nephews, and all of them use the same man to circumcise their sons because he's the guy in Jerusalem, the go-to guy. He's just the expert. The guy does 3 or 4 circumcisions a day. He is a perfect record. He's considered one of the most skilled people in Israel. So I went and I asked this guy. He said, nobody does circumcision in Israel for an adult outside of a hospital. I said, why a hospital? He said, it's dangerous for an adult. In a way, it's much more dangerous for an adult than for an 8-day-old baby. And there could be complications. And if there's hemorrhaging, guys, I hate to be graphic about this, but this is the reality of what we're talking about, that there's actual physical dangers to being circumcised as an adult. Now go back in time 2,000 years to the Roman Empire, where we're dealing with rusty knives, and you have probably over 1 million, possibly 2 or 3 million people in the Roman Empire who are a minority, but they're a large enough minority to where they're noticed in Jewish sources, and they're clearly a contingent in the synagogues, where they're known as the God-fearers, and they want to be part of Israel. But the main barrier keeping them back is this physical circumcision. You know, you had some man who'd say, well, I'm 45 years old, this will kill me, right? So I can't be part of Israel, I can't be part of God's covenant. This is what they were being told by the rabbis, and quite frankly, what they would be told today by the rabbis. This is not some obscure doctrine, right? This is just fact in the Jewish world. And in some ways, it's a great analogy or a great parallel to what you described as someone who's baptized in one denomination has to be rebaptized in another. Because guess what, Michael? And this is obvious to anybody in the Jewish world, but let's say in America, you have most men who are actually circumcised by doctors in the hospitals, or at least in earlier generations were. If one of those people goes to a rabbi, one of those men, and says, I want to convert to Judaism, but I'm already circumcised, the rabbi is going to require him to undergo a recircumcision. And that will, I don't want to get graphic here, but there's blood involved. And the question is why? The person's already circumcised, yeah, but not under the authority of the rabbis.
Right.
So I think that's a lot of what they're talking about. That's my take. When I read this years ago in Acts, my understanding was, oh, okay, you have a bunch of God-fearers in the synagogues who are hearing Paul preach, and they're like, oh, okay, we actually believe in the Messiah that you're talking about, and we've been kept at the door. We're in the back of the synagogue being treated as second-class citizens because we're not Jewish, and we have this barrier to us becoming Jewish, and we can't be accepted by other Jews until we're circumcised. And Paul is saying, you know what? You don't have to be circumcised to come into God's covenant. And I think that's the key passage here in Acts 15. It appears in 3 places, Acts 15, 20, 29, and then in Acts 21 that we'll get to, hopefully. And the point there is that you have these people who there's, and this is my take on it, okay? And this is after encountering many people they'd come to Israel. A lot of them are it's interesting because they're coming from a New Testament perspective, and they say, Nehemia, I've been going to my Messianic congregation for years, and they won't let me be a member because I'm not Jewish. And I've heard, you know how many times I've heard this? Many times. Yeah. They're not officially a member because they're not Jewish. They're treated as a second-class citizen. And boy, what an amazing parallel to the non-Messianic synagogues in the first century, or maybe even what's happening in Acts 15 with the Pharisees who are believers, that if they're not Jewish, they're not a full-fledged member of that congregation, and they're somehow considered different and separate. And they come to me and they say, Nehemia, I want to be circumcised. And I'm like, hey, first of all, guys, don't look at me. I have no skills. I have 2 left thumbs. Just walk away. And, you know.
While you can.
Well, what's that?
While you can.
Yeah, while you can. Exactly. And I've consulted, you know, circumcisers for them and doctors. And I'm told, hey, look, this can only be done in a hospital. And it's very dangerous. And it has to be done under proper supervision, right? A baby, you can do that in someone's living room. I was circumcised in my parents' living room in Chicago, in West Rogers Park, and
we've done it in our lobby here.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's
not me.
But to babies, I'm assuming, right? Oh, okay. Yeah. But to adults, as a rule, at least in Israel, which is the world's experts on circumcision of adults, it's only done in hospitals because there's a danger involved. And so imagine in the first century where there's really no concept of medicine, there's really no concept of hygiene, and these people are being told, sorry guys, you can be part of our congregation for 30 years, and now you can even believe in Yeshua, but you can't be part of this body. You're part of some other separate body. You're, you know, and I mean, this is what they were.
Associate members.
Associate members is actually the term they use in some of these Messianic synagogues, right?
That's right. That's right.
So they're being treated as second-class citizens. I think this is what Paul talks about when he refers to the one new man, right? Meaning that there's this, he's not saying there's no such thing as a Jew and no such thing as a Gentile, but when you're joining together, meaning the concept these Pharisees had was that first you become a Jew, and then you can become a Messianic Jew who believes in Yeshua. But first you have to be a Jew, and the way to become a Jew is to undergo the circumcision. Well, so here's my take on this, Michael, and this will not be popular in the rabbinical world. It won't be popular in the Karaite world, but my take on it is when I look at this, I mean, to me, it's the story of Abraham and the Israelites in the desert. The Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years. They'd heard God speak at Mount Sinai with their own ears. And they're wandering for 40 years in the desert, and we come to find out suddenly in the book of Joshua that these guys were all uncircumcised.
Right.
40 years they're wandering in the desert, and they're not circumcised. And why weren't they circumcised? Because they were traveling, and it was dangerous. They never knew if 5 minutes from now or the next morning, if the cloud would rise and they would have to follow, and all the circumcised men or even babies couldn't travel. When you're, I don't want to be graphic here, but when you're circumcised, there's a recovery period. We know that from the story of Shechem and Dinah and the daughters, Shimon and Levi there in Genesis. But the point is, so for 40 years in the desert, they said, okay, we got to wait until we can come to the promised land and be in a situation where there's no traveling involved, where there's time for recovery, and it might only be a few days. But in the desert, they never knew that they had a few days, because at any moment the cloud could rise. So they said, we're going to wait. And then when they enter the land, then it was the right time, and then they were circumcised. And then we have the story of Abraham. He comes into the land. He's called out of Haran when he's 75 years old. And he's not, that's in Genesis 12. And it's not till Genesis 17, when he's 99 years old, 24 years later, that he's given the commandment of circumcision. So for 24 years, Abraham is walking with God. He's Avram at the time, right? He's not Avraham yet. He's Avram. He's walking with God. He's in fellowship with God. He's in covenant, but not the covenant of circumcision because he's not ready. Because God could have said to him at any time, and it's interesting, what did he say to him? Go, lech lecha me'artzecha, go for yourself from the land of your birth and of your fathers to where I will show you. So Abraham was like the Israelites in the desert. He never knew when the next situation was where he would have to get up and go. God knew. God could have said, hey, Abraham, I've got this thing for you, circumcision. you're going to be here for 3 weeks recovering. Don't worry. Do what I say. Do the circumcision. But instead, God said, you know what? My servant Abraham isn't ripe for circumcision quite yet, and I still love him, and I'm still in covenant with him, and I'm still walking with him. And then I put myself, and I'm trying to have some empathy here, Michael. It's easy for me to say, everybody go out there and get circumcised. That's real easy for me because I did it when I was 8 days old, and I'm told by my mother that I pissed in the mole's face. I got him. That'll teach him. But the point is, I didn't know what was going on. I was an 8-day-old baby, and it just happened to me, and, it's just a fact. But for an adult, even today, it's not a trivial thing. It's actually a really big deal. And I think that's the key to understanding Acts 15, and especially when you read what they said there, which I hope we'll have time to get to. I think the point there was these Pharisees were saying, oh, no, those people, they're associate members. They can't be part of our body. They can believe in Yeshua all they want, but they can't really be part of it till they first pass in through our authority and become Jews, and then they can be part of this congregation, of this group of believing in Yeshua. And even James rejects that, right? Even James says, no, that it's not just Paul, because sometimes people say, oh, it's Paul, he did away with the law. James is saying this. So can we read what James says for the Gentiles?
Let's set the context a little bit with Peter back here, because this is years after Peter was sent to Caesarea, the household of Cornelius. These were God-fearers, according to the standard at the time. They're praying to God 3 times a day. And when Cornelius was told to send his soldiers down and to find Peter and have him speak, while Peter was yet speaking to him, it says that they all spoke in tongues just like they had on the day of Pentecost. So Peter said, who is I to withstand God? He would have baptized or mikvahed these Gentiles, because they hadn't gone through this process, being accepted as Jews. But yet they saw that God had worked in these Gentiles already. And so when you've got others, Pharisees, who are believers, who are saying, no, they're not really saved. They can't be saved unless they do that. Okay, now we're going to get, Barnabas and Paul are going to come down to Jerusalem, and there's going to be a cat fight here, and James is going to have to step in on this.
And I want to try to, as much as I can, stay out of Christian theology, right? Because, to be saved and what all that means, I'm Jewish. I got to stay out of that, right?
Okay.
People can work that out for themselves in the New Testament, fear and trembling with prayer and study, which I believe in general. But I'm just thinking as you're describing this, the Pharisees are saying they can't be saved. And the meaning of the name Yeshua is Yehovah Yoshia, Yehovah saves. That's the meaning of his name. He bears that name, the name Yehovah Yoshia. Yehovah is the one who saves. And what the Pharisees are really saying is because these people are not circumcised and haven't gone through the hoops that we've set up for them to jump through, they can't have any part in Yeshua in this salvation, in this Yehovah Yoshia salvation. Because first they need to be Jews, and then they can get saved as Jews. So I think that's really an interesting image there. And then what we have in Acts 15 in response to that attitude is what's called the Jerusalem Council, right? That's how it's referred to as today. And there's a lot of different views about what that is.
The contention between the Pharisees who believed and Paul and Barnabas and the believers, the Gentile believers in Antioch, finally resulted in the cat fight, as I call it. Other people call it the Jerusalem Council. But finally, when they were about to come to blows, then James then spoke up. And he quotes the prophet Amos. And it says, to this do the words of the prophet agree. As it is written, after this I will return and I will build again the tabernacle of David, which is broken down, and I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up, that the residue men might seek after the Lord, which from Amos is Yehovah, seek after Yehovah, and all the Gentiles upon whom my name is called, saith Yehovah, who does all these things. So obviously, from Amos, his perspective and his prophecy is that Gentiles are going to be a part of this thing, in this very thing of rebuilding the tabernacle of David, which we find that Jeremiah is the one who hid the tabernacle of David.
Well, my point last time, Michael, is we were talking about Abraham, who for 24 years walked with God without being circumcised. We have the Israelites for 40 years in the desert who walked with God, even heard him directly at Mount Sinai without being circumcised. Certainly all the new generation who was born wasn't circumcised. And my point there was that God waited for them until it was the right time for them. And when it was the right time for them, then they were circumcised. And my point here is, as I read this in Amos, and as I think they understood this in Acts 15, I think the point there is that what they're saying to the Pharisees is, you're imposing this standard upon people, which the Bible, the Tanakh itself doesn't impose upon people, and quoting Amos about the Gentiles over whom my name has been called. So if Amos said there's a function for those Gentiles within God's plan, within God's plan, how dare you keep them out and say that they have to jump through these hoops to be part of God's plan? Amos said it. Why isn't that good enough for you? I think that's the response to the Pharisees. And then in Acts 15:19, we then have the Jerusalem Council issuing this decree, so to speak. It says, therefore, I have reached the decision that we should not trouble those Gentiles who are turning to God.
That's right. King James says turn, but no, it's who are turning. It's a process, turning to God.
Yeah. But I think the key for me here is the trouble.
Okay.
But we should write to them too, and then it's a list of things, and there's different versions of it. We don't have time to get into that, right? But basically, many versions read 4 things: to abstain only from things polluted by idols, from fornication, for whatever has been strangled, and from blood. We could have a whole teaching on what those 4 things are, but basically it's, look, guys, and we'll read verse 21, okay? Let me read that. For in every city for generations past, Moses had had those who proclaim him, for he has been read aloud every Sabbath in the synagogues. So I think here's what they're telling the people. Look, we're not going to trouble you. We're not going to keep you out of the door from entering in and becoming part of this movement if you believe. We know you're going to synagogue every week. You're going to hear Moses proclaimed in the synagogue, and you'll know what to do. And in the right time where you feel led to do these things based on what you hear read in the synagogue, you'll know if you need to be circumcised or not, if that's feasible in your time. And until then, look, here's 4 things these things can't wait. We can't have, and mainly because
isn't he quoting a standard in the Torah? I mean, he's not pulling this out of a hat here.
We could have a whole discussion about where he gets these. Like I said, that's a whole big teaching.
Okay.
But I think some of these things are kind of no-brainers. You can't be eating things that are sacrificed to idols. This was a big issue at that time. And today people have a hard time understanding, what does that mean? Something polluted by idol? What does that mean? So in the 80s, I was invited once to this banquet. And it was a vegetarian banquet. So I could eat everything there, I thought. And I said, and it was free food. And I said to this person, why is there all this free food? What's going on? These strangers are inviting me. He said, oh, no. This food has been dedicated to Krishna. Right. And since Krishna can't eat it, the people who come consume it on Krishna's behalf. And it's a ritual consumption, but the food's free. I'm like, no. That's idolatrous food. You're asking me to participate in food sacrificed to an idol, and therefore I'm participating in idolatry. I can't do that. Right? And so I think that's the message here, that, when I encountered this in the 80s in the United States, it was a rare thing, but this was the standard thing that would happen. You had all these temples in the Greek cities, dozens of temples. They would slaughter the meat. Well, the statue of Zeus can't eat it, so now we sell it on the market for cheap. The statue of Dionysus can't eat it. We sell it on the market for cheap. And they were flooded with this food that had been sacrificed to idols. And they're saying, look, guys, we know where you live. This is a big issue. So we need you to focus on these things that are immediate issues. You'll hear the rest in the synagogue, right? This might be a bit complicated and nuanced. And things like, fornication. And like I said, we could talk about each one of these things in an entire study. I think most people understand that correctly as sexual immorality. Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, whatever has been strangled. That's an interesting statement, because this goes, my understanding of that is that the ancient Israelite way of slaughtering animals, they would cut the throat. And that's how most people today in many societies still kill animals. But the Greeks were doing something where they were strangling an animal. And so the lifeblood wouldn't flow out until after it had congealed and it was dead. That's the standard explanation of this that I've heard, at least, and there's maybe other explanations. It's fine to discuss those. So you would be eating an animal that still has blood in its veins, whereas if you eat a normal animal, its throat is cut, then you're good, right? But they were strangling animals in the Greek world, so that was a specific problem to that culture. And from blood, the question is, what does that mean? Does that mean murder? Probably not. I don't think they needed to be told not to murder. That was pretty obvious. What they needed to be told was not to eat blood, which is that's in Genesis 9. That's a covenant to Noah and his descendants, not to eat blood. So these are some basic things to get them started as people who are coming out of complete paganism. And then after that, go to the synagogue, and we have the Torah portion. You'll hear Moses preached. You'll hear Moses read in the synagogue, and you'll know from Moses what to do, right? And as you're convicted to do that in your heart, you'll do it, right? We don't need to, we don't need to spoon feed you every single one of the 613 Pharisee commandments. You'll hear the real commandments from Moses. That's my take on this, and I don't know if your view is, but...
Well, we're dealing with Antioch. We're dealing with the synagogue there that Greeks are going into the synagogue already. Right. So this is no new news to them. For them to be able to go into the synagogue, okay, no idolatry, no sexual immorality. We don't have to have to protect our wives and daughters from you guys coming in.
Well, there's another aspect to that. In that one of the ways you would worship at the temples, going back to the time of the Torah, right, is you would go to the temple prostitute, right? So a lot of times in the Tanakh where you see the word prostitute, it's not a normal word for prostitute, which is zonah. It's the word kideshah. Kideshah is a temple harlot. And the concept was that you would go to the temple, you would make an offering of money to the god, and then you... how do I put this in clean words for a family audience? You would interact with the temple prostitute, and that was seen as a holy union between the god and the goddess, right? At least that's what they told their wives, right? No, but they really believed this, right?
Right.
They believed this so much that there was this Roman emperor, who started out actually as a high priest of the Canaanites. And there was a military coup. His name was Elagabalus, and he comes to Rome, and as a high priest of the Canaanites, he finds the Vestal Virgins, and he says, "Oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. They're temple prostitutes. I get it." And he went into the temple of the Vestal Virgins, and he did what a Canaanite would do, right? He entered into the holy union with them, and this was a scandal in Rome that got him assassinated eventually, right? Because they couldn't understand how somebody would be so blasphemous from their perspective. The Vestal Virgins were supposed to remain virgins, whereas in the Canaanite world, virgin was the state of the goddess, but you would have relations with the temple prostitute as this holy act in their mind. And so you have these people in Antioch who are part of the Canaanite world, Greek, but also Canaanite. They're like, "Look, guys, I know what you've been taught from the time you're children, that this is a holy act. It ain't holy. Stay away from this porneia, from this sexual immorality." You'll hear more details about that in the synagogue, but this is one of the key issues that we need to get you started on, because in your culture that you're coming from, even if they've maybe been coming to the synagogue for a while, it might not have been obvious. So we just got to lay some ground rules. The rest you're going to hear from Moses in the synagogue. And look, he doesn't say don't murder and don't steal, because everyone knows not to murder and steal. But they had been trained in their culture that what the Torah considers to be evil is actually righteousness. And it was those things that I think they're pointing to here in Acts 15, this engaging with the temple prostitutes and eating blood and participating in sacrifices to idols. No, guys, don't even touch that stuff. The stuff that you've been told that it's like Isaiah says, good is evil and evil is good. You've been told this evil stuff is good, and you need to be, what you know intuitively to be evil, you've now been told is good. Guys, it actually is evil. Stay away from that. That's my take on it. So, okay. And there's other ways of interpreting it. There's entire books that have been written on this passage. So I don't know that we're going to solve it here in 20 minutes. But but the key, here's the key part for me that I want to hear your view on this, Michael, is verse 21, which is a part about, because I think many Christians say, for in every synagogue for generations past, Moses had those who proclaim him, for he's been read aloud every Sabbath in the synagogues. And many Christians read that, and I think they hear, oh, yeah, don't worry about Moses and anything he says, because there's people who read him in the synagogue. You don't have to worry about anything he says. But I don't think that's what they meant here in the Jerusalem Council. Or what's your take on it?
No, the situation is that those Gentiles are turning to God. Okay, they've been living in a pagan world. They're turning to God. They're hearing Paul, Barnabas. They're hearing Luke. They're hearing Alexander, the son of Simon of Cyrene. He's there at that synagogue. And so, these people coming from a pagan background, from a Greek background, now, okay, if they can control themselves, if they really are turning to God, then this is the baseline. Now you come in, and now you're going to hear Moses taught in the synagogue. Yeshua said, do not think that I've come to destroy the Torah of the prophets. I did not. I came to fulfill. Not one jot or one tittle is going to pass from the Torah till all is fulfilled. And we know that the Torah and the prophets, there are a lot of things yet to be fulfilled in Scripture. And so, this is where the foundation is, and you're going to be learning about this. Mm-hmm. They're turning.
Right, so this is basically the kind of the first step, these 4 basic things to get you started in the synagogue, and then you'll hear the rest, and from, the weekly Torah portion, essentially, which they heard in the synagogue. And, what confirms this for me, that this is the context, or that this is the meaning of what the Jerusalem Council is saying, is when this is repeated. It's in Acts 15:29, but then also appears in Acts 21. Can we
let's
jump to
go there.
Acts 21?
Let's go there.
And I'm going to let you set the context here of Acts 21. I don't think we have time to read the whole thing, but maybe we'll have to continue next time. Let's see. But I want to get to Acts 21:25. That's ultimately what I'm trying to get to. But we have to start off with Paul arriving in Jerusalem, and they're like, okay, Paul, there's a lot of people who are upset with you. Let's see, where do we find that? They have been told about you. This is verse 21. Acts 21:21, that you teach all the Jews living among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, and that you tell them not to circumcise their children to observe the customs. And I want to stop here for a minute, guys. There are Jews who are going to watch this program, Jews who aren't Messianic, who aren't Christians, and they're going to hear what I said in the previous segment about circumcision and the 24 years of Abraham and the 40 years of the Israelites in the desert, and they're going to say, Nehemiah is teaching Gentiles they don't need to keep the Torah of Moses. That's what they're going to hear.
Right.
They're going to hear
That's
that
what they're going to
because
hear.
they're filtering it through their own terminology and their own concepts rather than actually listening to what I said.
And
right?
That's my point of the Pharisees who become believers. They're still going to filter things through their entire culture, rabbinic Judaism at the time.
Oh, absolutely. You could have a conversation today with an Orthodox Jew, and you talk about Torah, and he'll say, but the Torah forbids and the Torah commands. And you say, where is that in the Torah? Well, it's not in the 5 books of Moses. It's in the Talmud, or it's in the Shulchan Aruch, or in the Mishnah. It's in the oral Torah, right?
Yeah.
Or it's an injunction established by rabbis, or it's tradition. And all of that can be collectively referred to in everyday speech as Torah. Mm-hmm. And Jews often will have a difficult time distinguishing between those. And I've had conversations with people where I'm like, hey, that's actually not written in Leviticus or Numbers or Deuteronomy. The origin of that is a 13th century tradition of rabbis, not even commanded by the rabbis, but just a tradition that's taken hold. And the response I get is like, oh, well, you're splitting hairs. It's all Torah, right? It's all binding upon us. Maybe it's binding in different ways, but we're all required to carry these heavy burdens. And this is the Pharisee conception to this day, right? And the average person certainly doesn't necessarily know those subtle distinctions, and I guess they're not that subtle. There between something in the Talmud and in the Tanakh, to me, is a really big deal. But if somebody heard that who believed, hey, all of this is Torah, everything any rabbi ever said, that's considered Torah, and then you had somebody come along and say, hey, you don't have to actually do that. I'll just give you a really simple example. I know we're running out of time, but there's It's kind of it's a crazy example. We might have to come back and just continue this next time. Can we do that, Michael?
We can do that.
Okay, because Acts 21 is so important. I wanted to get to verse 25 for the last 4 weeks, and we didn't get to it. That's what I wanted to start with. But let me just give you a really simple example. So there is a discussion in the Jewish world. I'll give you a really easy example no one will have a hard time with. It says in the Torah 3 times. I talked about this in my book, Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus, and we did a video about this. It became Raiders of the Lost Book.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's still available, guys.
It's absolutely essential. That's foundational to understand the gospel of the kingdom.
I think so, even though I'm the one who's presenting it, so I'm biased. But no, one of the things I talk about there is, it says 3 times in the Torah, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Now, if somebody asks me, Nehemia, am I allowed to eat meat and milk? Am I allowed to eat a cheeseburger? I would say absolutely, as long as the cheese is biblically permissible and the burger is biblically permissible. There is no prohibition whatsoever to take the cheese, slap it on the burger, and eat it. In fact, it's delicious. I do it. It's perfectly fine. If an Orthodox Jew heard me say that, he would say, oh, Nehemia is teaching against the law of Moses.
Right.
Nehemia is telling people they don't have to keep the Torah. Nehemia is telling people they're allowed to eat unclean food, unkosher food. What I'm actually saying is, hey guys, I read the Bible myself, and it doesn't say what you claim it said. And I wonder if this isn't what's happening with Paul. You have these people who have these traditions, they have these practices, and those are superimposed on the Torah. Some of them actually predate the Torah, and boy, that's a controversial thing to say, but they do. There are things forbidden in the Torah that were the practices that the Israelites brought from Egypt, that Jews were still doing in the first century, and some of them they still do today. Things that, in a sense, not in a sense, they predate the time of Moses, and therefore the Torah forbade them, and we still do them today, and we say, tradition, tradition. We say it's a tradition to do it. Yeah, tradition the Torah specifically forbade. So you have these things that people have a hard time distinguishing between that and Torah, and I think that's why the people are looking at Paul and saying he's teaching against the Torah of Moses.
That's right. Now, he was a Pharisee. He was raised at the feet of Gamaliel, flower of his generation, memorized the Torah, and he is really, if he's listening to what Yeshua had to say, Yeshua vehemently and repeatedly, deliberately violated rules and regulations invented by the Pharisees and just threw them in his face, those rules and regulations in their face, and didn't do it. And that is what, you so beautifully put it, the washing of the hands, all
Acts
these
15
things.
And Mark 7, and guys, go look at it in the Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus.
And so for Paul to continue on that same thing, so he could be speaking against the customs, but he wouldn't be speaking against the actual Torah of Moses, but their interpretation.
Well, so customs is a term that's ambiguous, because customs could be minhag, which is a man-made tradition, or it could be mishpat, which we usually translate as a judgment, but it's a category of commandment that also can be translated as customs. Right, and it's used that sense in the Tanakh. And so the point is that customs is this ambiguous term in Greek. In Hebrew, well, we would know from the context what they're talking about. And I think this is what they were accusing Paul of violating, of teaching against. He doesn't have to, not to circumcise their children or observe the customs. Hey guys, you don't need to do this. I don't think that's what Paul was saying. I don't think that's what the Jerusalem Council was saying. Although, I say to the people, hey, I'm not a Christian. Work it out for yourselves in fear and trembling with prayer and study before the creator of the universe. But look at the evidence and decide for yourself. And if you've never heard this other possible interpretation, which I think many people, I'm not the first one to say this about Acts 15 or Acts 21. Many people have said this, who are studying these things and trying to understand the Hebrew roots of their faith. I think this is a common understanding. But I think a lot of Christians have never heard this perspective.
Yeah. Now, you've got something else to bring concerning the book of Acts, and that's going to take us over into also John, and John chapter 5. You've got to come back. We've got to continue on with this because, ladies and gentlemen, there's great revelation, great unfolding of the scriptures. As Daniel said, or the angel Gabriel said to Daniel, knowledge will increase. Men will run to and fro. And as Nehemia has run to and fro from the land of Israel, and now knowledge is increasing, and we see this is just not on the internet. This is knowledge of God's word and how it applies to our lives. Join us again next week for Shabbat Night Live, and we're going to take you. Join us. You have to be here for Passover, because now we're going to be able to expand into the whole thing. Nehemia, would you please close in prayer with the Aaronic blessing?
Yes, Yehovah, thank you so much for giving us your precious Torah and bringing your name to the world, Yehovah. Thank you so much for this opportunity for people to come and hear your word read in the synagogues every Shabbat, and now they can even read it online in this wonderful opportunity for communication. Yevarechecha Yehovah v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Yehovah panav elecha v'yichuneka, Yisa Yehovah panav elecha, v'yasem lecha shalom. Amen.
Amen. Well, Shabbat Shalom to our fans. Shavua Tov. Have a good week. Next week, we're going to have Tim Mahoney, Patterns of Evidence, the man who did the movie, and he's going to be releasing a new movie come time of Passover. But then, right after that, we're going to be back with Nehemia Gordon to launch off for the Passover weekend. This is something you don't want to miss. We'll see you then.